bastard. Trying to get the angle of attack. Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on... Well, you know, look, it's a terrible, terrible morning. There's no question about that, but it's not entirely weather-related. In fact, the weather this morning has not been that bad. It's still humid, but it's not oppressive. That's a big difference. In fact, when I drove this car here this morning, I took the top down. It was still dark out, and it was actually quite nice and lovely. Didn't need the air conditioning. It was just a very nice little trip over, so I really can't complain that hard about the weather. I can feel it coming on now, and obviously it's going to be shitty here in a little while, probably even before this video's over. But for the moment, it could be worse. Animal-wise, there was a squirrel. You know, he was a little bit too close for comfort, and we'll keep an eye on him. Hopefully he doesn't join his friends and, you know, come in for some sort of a coyote-style attack where they start taking little bits out of you and then flee off so you can't get them. But we'll keep an eye on that. But otherwise, you know, the goat's long gone. Wasn't a deer on the road. Didn't see anything like that. No cougars, no ocelots, you know, no emus, nothing unusual around. So animal-wise, it's not bad. What has made this morning absolutely horrific is that I filled my flask of coronavirus whiskey last night at the shop, and I left it on my desk. So I am doing this, first of all, without the benefit of the protection of the whiskey. So if there's any COVID lurking behind those bushes or even this tree, it's going to get me, and I'm going to be in some degree of trouble. Secondary to that, it takes all the joy out of it. So, you know, I've got that going on this morning, and that is just not good. So because of that, two things. One, that I've already done a car very much like this a few years ago. I mean, it was one of the more sales-oriented videos, so it's probably short and enjoyable and better than these encyclopedic ramblings that go on now. But that said, it's already been done. And secondly, I'm not in any way inebriated, so this is going to be a short one. This isn't even going to be like, oh, it's not going to be 40 minutes and then it's 39. No, this one's going to be short, and it's going to be a quick overview of this car. And in that spirit, we are going to run, dash, leaping directly straight into it right now. And here it is. It is a 1972 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray Roadster, or convertible if you prefer, whatever, it's up to you. It is the last year of that chrome front bumper, which makes it a little bit special in my mind, but anyway, there it is. So this generation is the third. It came out in 1968. Some would say needlessly, because arguably what was the most beautiful Corvette of all time, the mid-year Corvette, ran from 1963 to 1967, 4 years. It had a very short production run. This thing ran from 68 all the way through 82. So it had a very long production run. I don't think some people would have minded if they'd, you know, eked out the C2 a little bit more before coming out with the C3, which some people consider a little bit over-grandized. It's called the Shark Corvette. Some people, look at these firemen. By the way, boy, is Peter's kid really slacking on the yard work. I feel like I'm in the Serengeti out here. I mean, if you were some kind of low-slung animal, could easily be hiding in these things and stalking me. So that kid needs to get on it and start cutting the grass. And look at these fire ants. Man, if you step in this thing right now, you're going to be skeletonized in like 10 minutes, like a piranha batch. So... And it's great. It's exactly where I just walk around the car. So we'll just keep an eye on that if we can. And then, you know, I'm losing my place with fear of those things. But anyway, look, it's the third generation Corvette. They call it the Shark generation for obvious reasons. Some people call it the Coke bottle Corvette because of its swoops and curves, of course, resemble a Coke bottle. And that's all fine. We'll go with either one of those. But It used basically almost the same underpinnings from the C2 with virtually no change at all, and that's not at all surprising. For one thing, they had spent an awful lot of time on the underpinnings of the C2, so, you know, they were considered to be pretty good, and it only ran for 4 years, so good luck getting a brand new Corvette down to the suspension around the accountants at GM. That just wasn't going to happen. And so they reused most of the suspension, and of course the car then had to be fitted around it. It was, you know, Zora Arcus Duntov. We've talked about him many times. He's a pretty cool cat, known as the father of Corvette, not the creator, because that was Harley Earl, but he was the father because he took the car from this sort of anemic little 6-cylinder roadster and turned it into something a lot more special. And he was passionate, and he showed the true value of having a single guy in charge of developing a car at General Motors, which otherwise virtually every one of their cars was made by committee. But Duntov's passion is what really fueled the Corvette and made it the American icon that we all know today. But anyway, it was designed by a guy named Larry Shinoda, and it came about after the mid-engine Corvette that Duntov dreamed about was squashed for, you know, the first of many times. Shinoda had a Mako 2 show car that he had made, a design for GM, a concept car, and it had come out in the early 60s. Before that, there was the Mako 1, which was called the Double Bubble, which I'll shoot a picture in, and then you see it's for obvious reasons. But this third-generation car borrowed an awful lot from that Mako 2 concept car. And Shinoda was a very cool cat. He was formerly interned at one of those FDR Japanese camps in World War II, but, you know, real car guy, went on to do amazing things at GM, a tremendous hobbyist, a racer, and part of a really dedicated and cool set of Corvette guys who, you know, really made these cars neat. And then that was given to a guy named David Halls after it was designed to be fit on the C2 platform. So they all came together to make this thing. And of course, Bill Mitchell headed it all up. There's some story that there was a Mako shark, an actual stuffed shark, on the wall of Mitchell's office. And when the Mako 2 concept car was getting painted, Mitchell told the paint team, hey, I want it to match this thing exactly. The way it flows from this blue into white, I want you to copy nature perfectly. And they kept trying and trying and failing. Just couldn't get it right. Mitchell didn't like it. So apparently one night, it's rumored one of the guys snuck in Mitchell's office, grabbed the shark, painted the shark, the one that would be on the wall, and then painted the car to match it. And when Mitchell came in a day or two later, saw the way they matched perfectly and congratulated them. Well, that story sounds like absolute horseshit to me. But anyway, it seems to be one of the legends of the Corvette. So anyway, it was the second Corvette to wear the Stingray badge. It first appeared on the C2 at the tail end. You can see here it's on the fender. They did put the words together. It's now Stingray as one word instead of two. And yeah, it probably looks better on this car, but it doesn't look weird on the fender that way. On the back, it's probably fine. Also, I looked up this fleur-de-lis thing, the Corvette emblem with the crossed flags. Apparently the first one had an American flag and a checkered flag, and that would have been fantastic. But then Congress passed some law saying you couldn't use American flags in advertisements for products released in the U.S. So GM had to, you know, change their illegal emblem, and they went looking for the coat of arms for Louis Chevrolet, the founder of Chevrolet, but apparently he didn't have one. He was probably some sort of peasant. So then they came up with this fleur-de-lis, the French symbol for peace or love or happiness or some shit like that. And, you know, honestly, having a French emblem on the car I find to be a little bit unsettling and weird, but yeah, there it is. They stuck with it for years. You can see it's also got a Chevy bow tie in there somewhere. And, of course, that New Orleans Saints logo. And then, of course, the rally flag for racing. And this guy actually put on a front plate to match it, so you got all kinds of Corvette emblems coming at you. They failed miserably at keeping this car a secret. It was going to be unveiled, you know, in one of the way that, you know, the car companies do that. They put them under a big sheet at a, event somewhere where there's lots of free lobster and champagne, and then they pull it off and everybody oohs and ahs. Well, before that could happen, a couple of months before, Mattel released a Hot Wheels called the Custom Corvette, which of course had been authorized by GM. And as it turned out, and as anyone, who understood those things at the time would know, being authorized by GM meant that this was probably the next Corvette. And indeed, that Custom Corvette Hot Wheels was the exact to-be-released 68 Corvette. So they kind of blew that design thing. That didn't work out very well at all. This design is interesting. Again, it ran for so long. Again, 68 through 82. So what the hell is that? That's not quite as long as the R107 for Mercedes, which was eternal, but it was still pretty damn long. That's 15 years, 14 years of production. There was no 83 Corvette, so you still had, some of these things running around looking new. So it means it really lived in a very tumultuous time. I mean, you've got, first of all, when it came out in 68, it's at the absolute peak of the muscle car era, the peak of it. I mean, you're talking about L88s and whatnot. You're talking about insane big blocks, some of them with aluminum heads and blocks, loads of torque, rock crusher 4-speeds, the hundreds of gross horsepower, just crazy shit all around under the hood of these things. You had the LT1, which was an amazing small block Chevy, basically race prepped, and it idled in such a way you couldn't even have air conditioning with it. So performance at the time was a big deal. Carry on a few years, and it lives through the absolute peak of the Malaise era, where you've got 1975 had the distinction of being the lowest horsepower Corvette ever made, if you sort of write off the first gen, those 6 cylinders, which actually probably on paper had more. But that thing had 165 horsepower in 75 as all the emission shit came crashing down on top of it. You could see from the 5-mile-an-hour bumper laws, they changed it. It went from having these beautiful chrome bumpers at both ends to having, polyurethane plastic caps at both ends. In 1973, it had chrome in the back and polyurethane in the front. And there were a couple of redesigns. The first the first release of this generation had a flying buttress rear coupe with a removable rear window and removable top panels, which was very cool. When 73 rolled around, the rear window was no longer removable. And then by the time, I want to say it was 77 came out, that was the end of the flying buttresses, and it got a bubble rear window, which would have been great as a hatchback, but you didn't get the hatchback part of it until the 82 Collector's Edition only. So, oh, God, there I am rambling a little bit more about stuff that people probably don't need. But so anyway, this thing, look, it lived through the moon landing, Nixon's resignation, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, the election of Ronald Reagan. I mean, this thing was around for quite a while, and as such became a pretty damn iconic car. It was all over TV and the movies. It was helping guys celebrate their midlife crises. Is that a word? Crises? God, and that's without the benefit of the coronavirus whiskey. So, but look, anyway, the whole thing was pushed and prodded along by Duntov, who really liked this car. Apparently, the C2, he hated the aerodynamics on it. He said it had just enough lift to be a bad airplane. So that may have actually had something to do with why this generation came out so quickly without letting the C2 mellow more. One of Duntov's big things was that this car had to run 140 miles an hour in a very stable and proper way, which took a lot of engineering at the time. I mean, this is not something every car did. So, it had more suspension travel available to it than any other GM product at the time. They could have made this thing ride softer than a Cadillac. I mean, it has shitloads of suspension travel. But he firmed it up because it had to be stable at 140, not to mention handle its way around a racetrack. So, having this guy, this passionate guy, lead the charge on the Corvette, and, a guy who was a little bit arrogant, condescending. He knew his customers better than they knew themselves in his mind. For instance, there was a heavy-duty suspension available in this year, but apparently it would knock your fillings out. And Duntov knew that some guys who wanted a great vet would just go out and, oh my God, yeah, give me that heavy-duty suspension. And he said they'd hate it. So he made that very exclusive and tough to get, part of a special order racing package. And if you ordered it, it did away with all kinds of options that you'd want to have, like air conditioning, stereo, that sort of thing. So by doing that, he limited that to really the diehards who genuinely and truly wanted it. And that was some of the clever stuff Duntov did to keep the car popular and moving along. And man, he was the #1 promoter of these things. Like, he would write to the car magazines, say that he wanted to bring his cars out for them to test and explain them and talk to them. And, you know, it's just the kind of thing that really doesn't happen anymore in the car world. Oh, boy. Anyway, you know, part of the deal with the Corvette, and it's been ongoing basically since new, is affordable performance. And we talked about that in that Formula Firebird the other day. The Corvette is kind of the next level of that because it competes with a much tougher crowd. But when these cars came out, if you ordered one with that LT1, which was kind of a race-prepped 350 with solid lifters and, you know, very unhappy at low revs and screaming at high revs, the thing was basically a road and track car. I mean, you're talking about a car that could compete in international GT racing effectively right off the street and compete with cars that cost 3 times as much. I mean, there were magazines comparing it unironically to the Ferrari Daytona. It held its own very well against the Porsche 911, which was, of course, much more money. And, you know, everybody said that the car did quite well for the price that it was being offered at. And you just had to give it credit for that. And of course, that's become a Corvette thing, even down to the new one. I mean, the new C8 Corvettes are, you know, these insane mid-engined exotic cars that very much compete with things that cost 2 or 3 times as much. And that's, again, part of the Corvette lore and legacy. So here it is, in the spirit of the short, and I do mean short, video that we're going to do on this thing. I'm going to pause for a minute, collect my thoughts, get my shit inside, and we're going to go around it, then hop in and go for a spin. Alright, so away we go. I find the lines of this car to be absolutely stunning, and I do love the pop-up headlights that, of course, continued the trend from the C2 and sort of instituted it as a Corvette tradition. These were now vacuum-operated instead of electric, which, of course, would present a whole endless stream of vacuum-related problems down the road, but, you know, for the hell with it. It's pretty cool looking. I like the incredible muscular and sexual design of the fenders. Forgive my language, or my... You can't help it. I mean, it's lusty. You know, look at those big, flared, sharp, creased, insane-looking front fenders on this thing. And, of course, the same muscular curvature at the rear. You've got some fender flares. You've got the beautiful rally wheels with the caps and rings. I think absolutely gorgeous. They were wider on the Corvettes, 8-inch instead of 7-inch. Those grills up front are not actually for sucking in air. In fact, air, you have to almost get down on the ground to see it, but that little lip spoiler underneath guides air up through a couple of holes into the engine compartment. And engine cooling and engine temperature was always a thing in this generation because, of course, it had a pretty small engine bay, and you know, thus temperature would become an issue. That's why it was really a car to have with air conditioning. They fixed that later on, early on and later on, like the L88s, that insane, the ZL1, whatever, the really hypo big block shit that was in the late 60s had cowl hoods with cold air induction, and that helped quite a bit. But all of the small block cars did not, and as such they had to rely on getting air from underneath, and generally speaking that would increase engine temperature. This little bit of Futurama GM crap was interesting. It had a vacuum operated headlight, oh Jesus, headlight, and this is without the whiskey. Anyway, this little panel here behind the vent actually lifts up with vacuum actuation so that the wipers can come out. You know, it's neat, it's gimmicky, and at the same time it's doomed to fail. It's working in this car. It actually feels like it might have had some sort of an electric conversion, because I ran them last night. I'm not going to do it in the dry, and they came out just fine. And the way that it worked so quick, and the little sound it made me think it was electrically activated. So who knows, maybe there's a kit for that. If not, the vacuum's working well on this thing, which is impressive. But anyway, that was done away with, I want to say, in 1973, because it had proved to be a little bit problematic. For one thing, even if it didn't break, the wipers just might not come out fast enough when you really needed it. So those vents on the side, functional, and also made to help reduce the engine temperature under the hood. You can see the nice little chrome stainless rocker panel down the side. I like the way it gets into a narrow-waisted thing from the big front, and then goes back into a swoopy shed at the back. Love the little chrome-surrounded windshield. Very, very cool, very attractive. Like the top of the door push-down door handles. I imagine it's probably not great in the way that rain gets in there and other stuff, but it is stylistically attractive. Going back into the rear spoiler, apparently the first concept cars or first designs had a much bigger spoiler, but Duntov realized that that was going to push down on the back end too much and really emphasize the understeer the car would have up at the front, with the particularly in the big block cars. So he minimized it almost to the point of it not being there, and that's again how Duntov looked after his people instead of just letting the advertising or design teams run wild. He really kept it all in check. Love the 4-round lamps, love the dual exhaust with the square box on either side. It looks quite cool. This one has the gas door where you'd expect it in an earlier Corvette. Neat little spot there. These vents are part of the GM Astro ventilation. I love their names. That was a new way to ventilate the car, which helped with cabin temperature and did away with the need for vent windows. So all very cool stuff. You have a fixed antenna there, and otherwise everything looking kind of cool. Let me show you under where the hood is. Let's see if top hood. God, everything is so difficult one-handed. It really is. All right. Okay, there we go. So that's the little hard shell tonneau cover, which pops up. There you see the soft top this thing has. Nice little quick thing to throw up. That's lovely. There's a button on the back of the seats to release that. There's 3 compartments, one of which has the battery in it for the sake of weight distribution. And pretty much this is the only storage you get in the car for your weekend trips or, grocery stores. So don't be taking this thing to Costco. It's probably not going to work out for you. But anyway, there it is. And you can put this back. This car also oddly comes with 2 more tops. The guy had a black vinyl hardtop and a body color hardtop that also go with it. So I guess 3 tops are better than 2, 2 tops are better than 1. Who the hell knows, and how does anyone know anyway? But they do come with it, and that's part of the charm of this particular example. It's also finished in pewter silver metallic, which was the rarest color in 1972. And also the convertibles were getting pretty rare in 72. The market for them had declined with all of the hysteria over new federal safety standards and Ralph Nader and all that kind of crap. Let's have a look under the hood. So again, this generation of Corvette saw a shitload of different engines. It really did. This one is about a 200, this was the base engine for 72. I want to say 200 net horsepower. It was the first year that they went to net instead of gross. So even if they were still basically the same engines as before, all the horsepower ratings, the advertised ratings, went way down because now it was measuring the horsepower at the rear wheels and not at the flywheel. So it was a way to standardize the industry, and we have California to thank for that, amongst other things. I think all Corvettes still had this chrome protection cap over the electronic ignition. That was part of keeping things proper. Again, this one is air conditioned, and this is a cruiser. I mean, this guy ordered this car, the original guy, as a cruiser, so it got the, smooth running, V8, you know, the same one you'd get in an Impala, basically, you know. The LT1 was the Z28 engine as well, but it was much more finicky and angry and revvy and racy, and it just wasn't quite the mild-mannered thing that this was as a boulevard cruiser. The V8s, this in 72, it was the 454 you could get, which was, you know, maybe a more peppy version of this. It was, if you wanted one that would cruise the boulevard and do better straight line performance, you'd opt for the 454, but it would still be smooth and run a AC compressor. It just made the front a little bit heavy and did away with some of the balance that you got from the small block. And that's, you know, it's 6 one, half dozen the other. Some people prefer one, some the other. But anyway, as time went on, the engines became much more smog controlled, much more anemic, and finally, the final year culminated with that Crossfire, misfire, ceasefire fuel injection that really suffers from a pretty bad reputation. So a shocking number of engines ended up in Corvettes. I want to say that the LS6, the aluminum-headed 427 big block, was Dunthov's favorite. That was the one he really liked, but it was a very expensive option, and not many of his guys could afford it, so that troubled him a little bit. Apparently, once he reconsidered the aluminum heads, he wished he hadn't done that, so more would have gotten it, but yeah, I guess it's made him much more collectible today. It uses, again, the same suspension as the C2. You've got double control arms up front with coilovers in the back. You've got that fiberglass center-mounted leaf spring, so 4-wheel independent suspension, 4-wheel disc brakes, all as standard. This one has the turbo 350 automatic, which back at the time, about 50, it was considered, you know, automatics were growing. In earlier Corvettes, the handshakers, you know, they outnumbered the automatics. By the time this one rolled around, it was basically 50-50, and a lot more people were opting for the auto. So that would carry on to today, when Corvette doesn't even offer a manual. And when questioned about that, they said, yeah, people need to buy the friggin' thing. I mean, we spend all this time developing them and nobody buys them. So, you know, make a market for it and we'll put manuals back in. Touche, Chevrolet. So anyway, there it is, and we'll put that back down. Very, very nice. So, again, I'm going to take 2 seconds to collect my thoughts. Then we're going to hop in, have a look at the interior, and go for a spin. All right, so let's do it. One thing that was improving as the Corvette went on were tires. They were getting better and better, as were brakes. So even as the engines became wimpier, the road holding in many ways became better. And it's just one of the, you know, idiosyncrasies that went on with this generation of cars. It really just a terrible time for car makers, with everything changing and going from unrestricted joy and fun into the modern era of, you know, horrid government oversight. In fact, that's why there was no cowl hood on some of the earlier cars. It was too noisy for California. So thanks again, California, for all the crap you did to make cars terrible in so many ways during the 70s and 80s. All right, so opening it up, obviously the car's made of fiberglass. You can feel it's a nice light door. You know, they had updated some of the interior for this year. It got a little bit more high-end and more in tune with becoming, you know, sort of a luxury-ish boulevard cruiser. It has leather seats, which are quite nice. They're high-backed, so you get headrests, basically, like the weird little plastic inserts in them. The dash setup is quite cool. It was, I don't know if it was an improvement from the C2 or not, but it was definitely different and on the same platform. You know, what did I see the other day? We were at Sebring, as you know, a little over a week ago, and we have this movie night at the RVs when we play, you know, we drink to the point of, you know, passing out and watch old stupid movies. And we watched Corvette Summer with Mark Hamill. If you remember that thing, I hadn't seen it in like 30 years. I mean, a long, long time, maybe more. And it really blew me away. I mean, not just because it was a really awful movie that was almost unwatchable, but the car was absolutely ludicrous. So, you know, by the time 77 rolled around, gone was the whole idea of performance for at least a lot of people, at least in the mainstream. And in was this insane heavily worked show car thing that, you know, took it to levels here before unseen or unwanted. But it was fascinating to watch. Annie Potts was in it. She drove a very, very cool van, and she was a prostitute of some kind, which is always helpful in a movie, and looked pretty good. But I have to say, Mark Hamill seemed pretty crabby through the whole thing. He really should have cheered up a little bit. But anyway, there you go. So you've got these two big gauges in front of you. Obviously, one's the 160 mile an hour speedo, one's the tack. I'm not a big fan of two-digit tacks. I find them to be immediately confusing when I'm just looking in a pinch. I mean, obviously, when you drive the car, you get to know which is which. You don't even think about it anymore. But, you know, on first glance, I think I might be going 25 miles an hour when I'm doing 60. It's just one of those things. So I do prefer a single-digit tachometer, RPM times 1,000, always have. Here's your headlights. I did a test of those this morning from the front, so if they're not in now, it'll be in the front of the video, but I think they still come on. Yeah, so it's got pretty good vacuum in this car, I have to say. And I do like the way they look when you're sitting back here and they mesh with the way the fender and hood hump is. I think that's kind of cool. You've got a very nice little three-prong steering wheel. Very thin, but still nice to grip. And they made this a smaller diameter to make it easier to get in and out of. Center stack gauges, you've got fuel, you've got water temp, you've got a clock that's working, oil pressure. And then, as the case is in the 80s, a lot of people upgraded their factory radios with these weird-looking Pioneer things that actually fit inside the factory location without being annoying. Although I'm not a big fan of the big bow tie on it. But it works fine, it's great, it's super. Wiper control in a very weird spot right here. Don't know why. They had done away with that fiber optic lighting test system in the center consoles by 72, and instead you got you know, an ashtray, which I'm sure was widely used in this car because everyone smoked. Your automatic with the PRNDL, the little ball shifter. You've got your climate control up there. Dual roller, still works good. And here, as a lot of Corvettes do, you get that little engine plaque. This one is not bragging about its horsepower for obvious reasons, but you got 350 cubic inches, 360 foot-pounds, and 8.5 to 1 compression. Low compression, again, because of all the federal emission stuff at the time. But it's just an amazing variety of engines that you could get in Corvettes. And we got one headlight still hanging up. It'll go down when we start it. It was. I mean, you had 327s, 350s, 427s, 454s. You had fuel injection, carburation, dual carburation, triple carburation. You just had all kinds of crap in Corvettes for many, many years. And again, you pretty much got Duntov to thank for that. Neat little pouch here to put stuff. Obviously, you can put a 9mm or a revolver in there, but, you know, it's going to be pretty damn visible. It's going to be hard to hide it. And as far as hidden gun storage goes, I basically see nothing. I mean, nothing. You're going to have to keep crap in your bag behind you or on you. And as far as Canadians go, you might be able to stuff one back under that convertible top, but he's just not going to be too happy about it. All right, let's fire this thing up. And there goes the light. So yeah, very nice sound that comes out of the rear end of these things. And that again was another sticking point on these cars, because as time progressed for the C3, noise standards became more and more stringent, so they had to become less noisy, and that must have been really irritating for the enthusiasts making them at the time. This one has power steering, makes it nice and easy to move around. Again, this is just a cruiser, this one. And obviously it's got a little bit of pep and V8 torque, but it is mostly just a boulevard cruiser. Not one of the, you know, hypo race cars that you could order and take to the track. It just isn't. I think they once this thing ran a little over a 15-second quarter mile at 90-something. So, you know, peppy enough to get you down the road, but much more of a driver than anything else. All right, I'm not going to drive into the sun with the camera, so I'm going to pick it up again at the end of the street. All right, we got Def Leppard on the radio, which is not altogether terrible music for driving a Corvette, although I will say their drumming got a lot less technical and complicated in that era. Thanks to a Corvette, actually. So yeah, there it is. You know, when you're driving again, look at all that. Dalton's windshield. Turn the corner. There can be little doubt about what car you're in when you're behind the wheel of one of these things. I mean, look at the fenders on this thing. They're pretty much unmistakable that you're in a C3 Corvette from any angle. You've got this incredible expansive hood in front of you. You've got sort of a laid-back seating position. The steering wheel comes back a little bit further than I would like, but of course that's just a feature of the time. And, you know, it's a really comfy and nice place to be. You feel more connected to the road than you would have in a Chevelle or a Camaro of the same era that had a lot more, obviously, metal around you, not to mention fiberglass. But, you know, this was much more of a driver's car, a road course car, than the muscle cars that were mostly about straight line performance. Of course, much of that was a carryover from the C2. Yeah, it's probably not the mission of the car as much as Duntov would have wanted it to be, but it certainly held its own on the road course. And I think everyone's favorite for that kind of driving was the LT1, that Hypo 350, because it was light up front, so it didn't understeer as much, revved beautifully, you know, just like some of the older Hypo Corvettes, and was a fun car to take around the racetrack. You got into the big block cars, yeah, they had pretty good straight line performance, but they tended to make the front a little bit heavy. Traffic. So I'm not going to be doing a highway run today because I have an appointment in town in the other direction, which is a shame, but I don't think I could have buried this speedo at 160. That really wasn't going to happen. I do know with you know, one of the Hypo engines in the 4-speed, you could run continually over 140, at least until it overheated. So that was one of Duntov's big deals, was making the car stable at a speed that tripled basically anything legal in 49 states. I think only Nevada had no speed limit at that time. Probably still doesn't today. But what a fun car to drive, and I do like the convertible. I'm usually not a fan of convertibles anymore, but I think they suit the Corvette. You know, top down, driving around, having a bit of fun, and of course letting the air course around. But, you know, whatever your miserable wife or girlfriend will drive, it messes up my hair. It messes up my hair. I don't know why women's mission in life is just to erase all, like a magic eraser, take all the fun and joy over the men that they've saddled and pulled up with. So anyway, there it is, 1972 Corvette Stingray convertible, or Roadster as the case may be. This is a nice original car, 63,000 miles, very, very well kept, and a lot of fun to drive. If you have an interest, it's for sale at Auto House of Naples, on the web at autohousenaples.com, or phone 239-263-8500. I'm going to keep plugging along, try to come up with something else fun to do, and we will see you with the next one. Take care.